Good afternoon, hello. I'm not entirely sure how to follow that. I am no theologian, there will be no Greek. So just go with me and do save your questions for afterwards. I too have, with great feeling with Steve, regret the afternoon slot a little bit and hope that I can keep you awake for another half an hour longer. So I'm Maggi Savin-Baden. My research is largely in things like digital immortality and artificial intelligence, funded by places like the Ministry of Defence. So I'll shoot you later. Anyway, here we go. So this is me talking about theological integrity and 5 pillars of dissent. I also have to confess that I'm the sub here because one of the speakers dropped out, so I'm the fill-in. So we're just going to go with that. So I wanted to start really the talk with the idea of what does it mean to be human. And again, a lot of you will have already talked about this, and Beth has already stolen a bit of my thunder today, but I probably should have anticipated that. But the whole idea of post-humanism, which is deeply problematic, particularly I think from a religious perspective, because it rejects the dualism, and there are all sorts of strange things, as many of you will know about post-humanism, where you can actually, the whole cryogenic movement, the whole digital immortality movement that goes along with some of this stuff. And some of the issues too around post-humanism, I think, link with actor network theory, for which for years and years and years I completely rejected as an idea, but I've now come round to a bit more, that the influence of actors and non-humans together. I'm not a great believer that we are managed by our own technology, but I do think we can be influenced if we're not too careful by the amount of stuff that tends to be thrown at us digitally through things like Amazon. So I think we just need to begin to do some questioning around what it means to be human, but also I'm big on the post-digital, and so my question would be, what does it mean to be a post-digital human? Again, many of you may have come across the work of Harari, but I think what's quite interesting about this work, although it's been hugely popular and very interesting, it's about some of the ideas around what it means to be this human being in this post-digital age. But I think the difficulty is there's a bit of confusion in this text, the implication that we might be bound up with a soul. And Harari explores this idea and gets a bit confused, I think, mixes up religion and values by using the word religion for any system that organises people, so whether it be humanism, liberalism or communism. And I suspect, and I suspect our learned friend in front of me here will, as a professor of digital religion or whatever it is, anthropologist, will help me to argue that case later. So, I think I'm somebody, I read a lot about AI, but I'm privileged to have a son who's just got his master's in AI, so he puts me right if I get things wrong. But I think the challenges of AI largely relate to the fact that many definitions are broad, unclear, and indeed wobbly. A bit like this bridge I was on a few weeks ago. So I think current perspectives tend to focus on these wide parameters between fear and hope, so you get one extreme or the other. So fear is about the loss of work, enslaving humans, making us obsolete, and surveillance capitalism. Or the hope that I will have a robot to care for me when my husband dies and I'm infirm. Virtual human support, entertainment, good security and effective defence systems, which I have to say I'm cynical about. Now, we had a comment earlier, I can't remember who it was from, about the mess that is AI, and how we just talk about AI just being one thing. And I can't remember who said it should just be maths, which is kind of good. So I've kind of put this table together because for me, AI is very much about, if you're interested in this, I can send you a copy afterwards, but it's about what we're doing with this thing that we call AI, from simple algorithms. I don't think Facebook is really AI, but it chucks stuff at us. It uses algorithms, symbolic AI, machine learning. I mean, about things like neural networks, facial recognition software, huge issue, again, which Beth has already mentioned, generative AI, semantic AI. And I think we need to be really careful when we talk about AI, what we talk about. When I used to do talks on AI about 4 years ago, I used to say, look, if you can distinguish between virtual humans and machine learning, you're kind of heading in the right direction to start with. But I think these distinctions are really important. It isn't just one thing. It's incredibly complicated, and it's even more complicated in this diagram. But what about theology in all of this? I'm not a theologian. I am a reader in the Church of England, and I do preach using PowerPoint and a microphone on a Sunday morning. But I think some of the issues I think we need to think about as Christians in these spaces is, as Beth says, the ethical use of images. And I'm really hot on the image thing. So all the images of mine are off places that are safe, or largely I've taken myself. So I think we need to be really careful about the use of images. I think we need to think and understand about the impact of AI of whatever sort in church life. We need to recognise and value the challenges of these large language models, and even the language we use around them, like I believe, or it is telling me, or it knows where I am, which is what I'll come on to a bit more in a minute. I think we also need to understand things like dupery and fake news. And we also need to have a creation of spaces to challenge the whole notion of digital tethering, which is, again, something I'll come on to in a minute. What was interesting is that I was doing a bit of research for a chapter I was writing recently, and I started it on a bid I'm putting in at the moment on theological education and AI. But one of the things that I didn't know was this idea that theological doctrine, and again the theologians may argue with me here, shape perspectives on AI, but there's not very much research so far on the impact of AI on theological education. But things like Graves said recently that the ChatGPT can be trained to support theological research and the development of sermons. And again, I don't know how many of you have done this, but I thought, well, let's have a go at this. Let's throw it into ChatGPT and see what it comes out with. Well, actually, it comes out with a load of rubbish. It's just a summary, basically. But I think what this does, it introduces questions about academic and theological integrity, as well as the whole notion of theological authority. So who is speaking here? Is God in the machine? All those kinds of broad questions. The other thing I just wanted to talk to you about is, again, recently I did a book launch at my college in Blackfriars about the new series on the metaverse that I'm co-editor for. And what really struck us was that David Burden and I, who've been writing books on the metaverse, have been doing this kind of work since 2008, which was a bit of a shock when we looked at the history of it all. So we've been fiddling around for a bit. So first of all, this is largely MOD-funded work. The creation of virtual tutors to help educate on particular topics 24/7, which have become increasingly more interactive. Things like virtual mentors or life coaches, which used to be about 8 years ago really popular in the States, but most of them have largely fallen over now. We created one for the Ministry of Defence to support people while they were out on manoeuvres. Or a virtual persona, which now it was created because it was about what one person's knows. So when they move on in the military, so all the knowledge goes with them. So they wanted a place to put it. So we created a virtual Barry. And this has then morphed into later work on digital immortals and digital afterlives, and creating copies of people that we can leave behind if you so choose. But my 5 pillars of dissent, sorry, I'm getting too hot up here, are trust and truths. Thank you, Steve. Trust and truths, a stance against dupery, environmental action, embracing the post-digital, and radical dissent. So these are the kinds of things that I think we need to be thinking about in terms of dissent with a small c, although actually up there it's got a big T. So trust and truths. I think we had some interesting conversation about some of the facts and myths earlier on today, and I think when you're thinking about large language models, you have to remember they don't have any access to external reality. Similarly, your phone does not know where you are. It might feel like it does, but actually it doesn't know where you are. Most data used in large language models is stolen, so most of the stuff you use in ChatGPT is stolen, and because of that, obviously, they don't have any sense of truth. They don't know anything, they just sequence things. So if you put in twinkle, twinkle, little star, what will you get back?
Oh, I wonder.
What you are, indeed. So it's a sequencing thing. So that is actually what's really going on, and that's what you need to remember when you use some of these large language models. And other things you need to know about ChatGPT, things like it will give you a lot of information. A lot of it you don't want. So if you ask it a question, I don't know if you've done this, but you just go shump, and you think, oh, well, I didn't really want any of that, thank you very much. It's more likely to make things up and rather say, I don't know. Obviously, I put suggestions, there are clear gender and race bias. And artists, writers and photo agencies are getting really, really fed up with how much stuff's been stolen. And the last bit, which I think is quite interesting, that corporate employers use generative AI tools without it being sanctioned by their organisation. So again, you may know a lot of this already. My son and I were playing around recently with ChatGPT images to see what would happen. And what we discovered was that if you ask ChatGPT to give you an image of a sandwich without any bread, it can't do it. Which I think is quite funny. You know, so people think it can do everything, but my ideal way of spending my time, which is not gaming, is to see if I can break ChatGPT. And there was a thing a few months ago, if you put one word in and told it to repeat it, it broke. Well, I tried it last week with Vicar, and it didn't break. My second pillar is dupery. Now, we're very familiar with dupery. We're familiar with magic, misdirection, illusion, and manipulation. And we had a reference to Shakespeare earlier, which I was delighted with, because you see a lot of this kind of stuff in Shakespeare. Most of the comedies are actually about misdirection. So you've got misdirection and trickery in The Merry Wives of Windsor. You've got drug-induced dreams in A Midsummer Night's Dream. In the tragedies, though, dupery is much more about strategy and tactics, well-planned manoeuvres, Lady Macbeth, Iago. Other forms of dupery, things like managing of magic in The Tempest, managing situations, or harmful trickery in The Merchant of Venice. So they're the kinds of dupery that we come to expect in life. We're familiar with those kinds of things. But I don't think we're as familiar as perhaps we should be in the other kinds of dupery that we see in the digital. So whilst magic is quite acceptable because we know we're being deceived, and quite often we're completely fascinated by it, it's not clear how we're actually being duped in the digital. And Beth already mentioned these, you know, this ideal Christmas present, you know, the Christmas jumper, yeah? Get yourself a jumper. In fact, when we went to London recently, my son said, right, I'm not doing the facial recognition software thing. He put a mask on, he pulled his head down, and off we went. You know, but if you don't want to be involved in facial recognition software, there are ways around it. It's dangerous stuff, particularly, I think, if you're black, I'm sorry to say. So, issue of dupery, things I think we need to be asking. How are our data being used? What kinds of academic freedom is allowed in surveillance spaces like Blackboard and other virtual learning environments? What kinds of university or even church software dupes us? And how are we being tracked, and do we know? The pillar 3, I think, is particularly interesting at the moment. The rector of Bedworth Parish recently had an argument about having to put solar panels on his roof of the church because it was a listed building. Now, I personally think it's deeply problematic that you can't do that, not that you can. So again, there are some interesting issues. But how often are ethical procurement addressed rather than, do we buy the cheapest computer for the church? What's our stance on goods used from China, where obviously you've got questionable manufacturing conditions and the creation of eye slaves of the 21st century? What percentage of energy used in our home and churches is green? We live in a fully electric home now. It drives me mad. There are days I wish I could turn the central heating on, but I can't because we have solar panels. And how clear is it to students and church members how their data that's collected is being used and where it's being shared? Because again, I'm not sure we're always terribly clear about that. Pillar 4, for me, it's very important to acknowledge that we are in a post-digital age. This is not a temporal place. It's not after digital. It's very much the fact that it is all merged together. I don't think we cannot have the digital. I said to somebody recently, even if you're on the top of Ben Nevis, if you've got your phone with you, it's a digital space. It's digital. We are digitally tethered. So the post-digital is about the fact that we're in this deeply problematic, deeply tethered, deeply managed space in many ways. And I think we're all digitally tethered. I can see it now. Steve down here is on his phone. He's probably checking his emails while he's listening to me talk. I don't have a problem. I was always a multitasker as a kid, and it drove my father mad. But we are digitally tethered. We carry them with us. We're always engaged. We wear a mobile device. How many of you go to the restaurant and you don't talk to whoever you're at dinner with, you talk to your phone instead? I see it a lot. We don't anymore. Or what about texting by driving? There was a phase when they used to send lorries down the M5 in the middle lane so they could see people texting on their phones either side. So again, just be careful of that. I know we're all hands-free now, but people still do that. Pillar 5, I am apologising at one level for this long quote, but another level, I think it's a really important thing. This is from Nurin Davids, who's a professor at Stellenbosch University. And she says, the university ought to be the one place where the expression of views and positions, no matter how controversial, ought to be heard. Disagreement and dissent are critical to the purpose and responsibility of the university and the church. The moment at which academic students or speakers are cut off, prevented from speaking, disinvited, or the moment academics are instructed to use this and not that text, the university becomes closed off to new forms of engagement. The more universities shut down ideas under guises of fear of causing offence or issues of safety, the more insular and uncritical the academic and institutional spaces become. The point of engaging with controversial arguments is not simply to listen to that which might be harmful or despicable, but to create opportunities for talking back. That is to engage in reasoning and to pursue truth. And I'm worried that there is not enough of that kind of dissent going on. I think there needs to be considerably more talking back into these kinds of spaces. So that was my 5th pillar, radical dissent. So the question is it all downriver from here? Is this where we're going down into the abyss? Well, I guess not. I did go into the abyss. I think, for me, the current focus in many universities is very much on ChatGPT, AI, the concerns of all of that. And I think at one level, okay. But another level, I think there are other concerns going on that we need to be aware of. I think we need to be looking at wearable devices, human transform and transformative technologies. And you can see at the top here, or maybe you can't, we've got ears over here, we've got an implant here. The one on the left helps him to understand the weather. the one on your right, sorry, the one on the left is here because he's colourblind and it helps him to detect colours. So more and more human enhancement is actually happening. And so my questions are, is that an issue? Is it a problem, or do we just go with that as well? I don't know. So I think some of the challenges here are trust, security, public perception, ethics, which we've touched on. I could do another whole talk on ethics, because that is big and our government is really not equipped. I've been sitting on one of the committees in the House of Lords for a while, and it is still extremely sad and clueless. Race and gender. So I think these are just a few of the challenges in terms of AI. But I also think we're in a position of a paradox. I love the work of Claude Parent on the oblique. And that's the image of the oblique on the left. But I think the problem we have is that as academics we struggle with a culture of busyness, the demand for speed. And I think sometimes as academics the subtext of our story imply that we take a kind of unwitting pleasure in that, oh well, I was up till 9 o'clock writing that paper, I think we're mistaken here. It's not about confirming our identities in that particular way. And Carl Lego, a good friend of mine who died a few years ago, wrote this, and I think this is really useful, that we focus on acclaim, accolades, acknowledgements, awards, bestowal and blessing. And the whole idea that we've got it wrong, we need to rethink the way we operate within our communities in a way that promotes dissent. And so for me, my reflection, and don't worry, it's a penultimate slide here, there's a sense that our identities can get tinged with sadness from the depths of our souls, because we want to make and find and create gentle spaces where our liminal lives can be nurtured, and yet we are in this culture of busyness. I think nurturing is a word that's not used very often in the landscape of universities, and I'm not sure how much it's used in churches, dare I say. Certainly not a word used that much in mine. But it's an important for managing this unsettlement and all this change that we're going through in this post-digital age. So I think maybe we need to see digital dissent differently. I think in the midst of our busy lives, we can learn to attend to the rhythms that fill us and fill our days, not with busyness and writing lots and lots of papers or loads of sermons, but filling it with spaces where we need to linger more and to enjoy what is put before us. So I'm going to leave you there, with a pause, because we've got Tim now, and you can go back to who's got a question in a minute. And there are some references for anybody who wants them. Okay.
It's not many people's work, it's just the kind of worrying thing and how influential it is at this point in history particularly, but
yeah.